Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nimhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, wherever at Hawk Blogger. And today is a very special Tuesday because we get to reunite with the absolute pinnacle of draft coverage with the man, the myth, the legend. Dane Brugler joins the show the day before. The day before the best draft guide in the NFL launches, The Beast. Dane, man, it is so good to see you. I can imagine that this is got to feel like a little bit of the end of a long marathon. You're almost at the finish line. How you feeling, my friend?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. This year was definitely a different process because in the past it's just been a PDF, and there's so much work that goes into it that I don't have uh, the time to really dress it up and make it this or that. Like I care about the work, and this year that's still been my process. I don't have time for anything else, but we've had a lot more people behind the scenes working on this, so there is an entire microsite uh, built for the beast specifically. And there's still a PDF option if you want to download it that way, print it, digest it that way. But now with this microsite, it's mobile friendly, very digital friendly. You can search any player you want. There's over 2,600 players in this prospects, and there's testing information for all 2,600. And so there's a search bar, search player you want. It'll come up. It'll say, oh, he's the 112th receiver in my rankings or whatever it is. So it's a lot. The visuals are great. The navigation is awesome. And so I think NFL draft fans are really going to dig it, and just the changes we made, the upgrades. But yeah, behind the scenes, it made for a very exhaustive process to get everything the way it needs to be for this microsite and all of that. So a little bit different process, a little bit, they had to change some things this year, but the content's the content, the work's the work. If for anybody that's had relied on the beast before, I think, you're still going to enjoy that part of it. The same background information, all the testing stuff, all the analysis, all that stuff will still be in there. And so I can't wait to share it with everybody tomorrow.
Well, for people that don't know, I mean, one of the things that separates the beast is really the information about the person that you
Yeah.
get about these players. So many people have access to data and scouting and tape and all that stuff, but you really, I think one of the things that really, makes your content special is you try to find out who this person is and what makes them the player that they are. How many hours do you think you spend on one edition of this?
I don't even know how to quantify. I really don't. Because it's a year-round process, and really more than a year, because right now I'm already doing stuff for 2026, and not really on purpose. It's just by default you're watching tape and you see a player for next year and you're taking notes because it's you're always looking forward, always. But I will say, like, the moment Christmas is over, like December 26th, I know from then until April 1st, it's every day is at least an 18-hour day, every day,
Oh my
in
gosh.
order to get it done. It has to be. It's the only way to get it done. Most of the work is done at that point in terms of the tape
Hmm.
study, because that's all done in the fall. Saturdays I'll watch games and then I'll make notes. And then Sunday is when the tape uploads. And so I can watch the tape and look at my notes and say, okay, check second quarter from this game. I watch the tape and do that. So that all the work is done in the fall, and then in the spring, or in all-star season, combine workouts, all of that, it's a matter of putting it all together into this guide and making the scouting reports and collecting all the pro day data. It's definitely an exhaustive process, but it makes it all worth it tomorrow when I can release it and people enjoy it. I always say this with the guide. It's okay if you disagree with my rankings. Like, don't take my rankings as Bible by any means. I mean, one of the things I love about the draft process is the fact that two sets of eyes can see two different things. Like
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
and I'm doing this from a very general perspective where a certain team with a certain scheme or personnel situation, they're going to look at these players a little bit differently than maybe I would have them ranked or you would have them ranked. And so I think the ability to dive more into the background and paint a picture of who these guys are on the field, but also as people, I think that's really the key and kind of the soul of the beast.
We're talking to Dane Brugler of The Athletic, writer, author, creator of The Beast, researcher of The Beast. I've talked to personnel people in the NFL, and they talk about area scouts, talk about where they get their insights about the people. And John Schneider's been very clear about this, especially the last few years, that they're really trying to get better about figuring out the person, not just the player. And you hear them talk about talking to training staff and talking to people that work around the
Mm-hmm.
buildings just to see how they treat folks and how they are at different areas. I'm curious, you talk to scouts, agents, family members. Where do you find that you get most consistently like the most interesting insights?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the player. Sometimes, going back and talking to their high school coach, especially if a player was a basketball player growing up and they didn't start playing football until high school, that's a really interesting conversation when you talk to their high school coach and find out, okay, well, he was a baby giraffe when we got him. He was very awkward. He couldn't run routes. He couldn't do this. Like, it's very interesting to get that perspective of and year over year, he got better at this and this and this. And, there are times obviously we have to be careful. Like they're going to pump up their guy when you're talking to any coach. And I think I've been doing this long enough where over the years, I think I have a good sense of who's getting pumped up, who's really giving it to me straight. And a lot of times I think players are more than willing to tell you about their journey and be open about it. And sometimes it's hard. I mean, you were at the combine, like some of those
Mhm.
press conference settings where there's 50 people in front of you, and like it's maybe not as easy to open up in a setting like that. That's why I love, the All Stars games where I can get one-on-one time with these guys after the fact, where I'm calling them on the phone. And I feel like they're more ready to open up and talk about different things. And sometimes I'll call a player about one thing and we end up talking about another that maybe I didn't know about that player. A good example, Jeffrey Bassa, the linebacker from
Mhm.
Oregon, a
Mhm.
potential top 100 guy this year. He was one of those basketball players, never played football until he got to high school. And I was on the phone with him, maybe a month ago, a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to learn more about that transition. And next thing I know, the more we're talking about his younger sister who was battling cancer when they were growing up, and how that really shaped him as a younger boy who had to become a man at a young age, grew up in a house full of a lot of girls. I think he has four sisters. So that really tells me something about him as going through that type of situation. Then also the transition he made in football. He started off as a safety, and by the time he gets to Oregon, he was signed as a safety at Oregon. Then they moved him to linebacker, and so all these different journeys are so unique and so different. And I think and sometimes it's not even the story; it's just the nuggets that you get. Another
Mhm.
Oregon player, Jordan James, the running back, he's one of my favorite non-top 50 guys in this draft. His entire junior season of high school, he played without a PCL in his knee. He
Wow.
tore it riding jet skis the summer before. He didn't want to miss any time, so just played through it. He led his team to the state title that year. Was all state. Days after they won the championship, he gets the surgery, and so it's like, all right, this guy can play through some pain a little bit. No worries about that. And then sometimes it's more about the journey and the story. Shavon Revel, I think a guy we've talked about before, the corner
Yeah.
from ECU. I mean, it's just as Hollywood as you get in terms of the injuries he had in high school. One being from just a horrific car accident, and then doesn't have the grades to go Division 1 in college, so starts out at JUCO. That's when COVID happens. He's working at Amazon at a fulfillment center, working midnight shift just to make ends meet. And he has a tryout at ECU, blows it away, has this amazing 2023 season, puts him on the radar. 2024, a month into the season, has an ACL. And it's like, okay, now he's down again. But just to hear him talk and the adversities he's had to overcome, it's just really an insight into the person and tells me something about how he's going to face some of the obstacles waiting for him in the NFL, which is such a key part of this process. Is a lot of these, especially the area you mentioned, the area scouts, they've done all the work trying to communicate with the rest of their team, their GM, the brain trust, the guys that are really going to be making the decision, what type of person each one of these guys are. That's such a key part of this. And it's it's definitely one of my favorite parts of what I do, is because when you're an evaluator, you, of course, you watch the tape, you analyze, but you have to be part detective, you have to be part psychologist, you have to be part reporter, journalist. Like, you have to wear all these different hats to try and figure these guys out, and that makes it a lot of fun. Makes for a really fun process.
What's an example of a guy with all this work that you do? What's an example of a guy that you feel like you missed on in the last year or two, and what did you learn from that process?
Um, well, I mean, okay, going back to just last year, like Tavondre Sweat. He had, at this time last year, it was right around this time, he had the DUI.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, how do we handle this? Like, he just had a DUI. Scouts are really getting on him because he was a party animal in school.
Right.
At one point in the season, he was close to 400 pounds. And it's
Hmm.
like, okay, weight concern issues. He really didn't have a ton of production until his senior year, his final year. Was known as a class clown, as an underclassman, and now the DUI. It's like, how do I possibly put this into context into a general rankings like I do? And I ended up putting him in the fourth round, and he goes in the second, and he
Hmm.
was like a 40th pick. The Titans were they were okay with rolling the dice at that point. And and I guess maybe it's not a great example because I'm not sure I learned anything. It's an example of how tough it is when you're dealing with things that maybe aren't on the tape. If all it were, when it comes to scouting, if all it was is watching the tape, this job would be a lot easier.
Hmm.
But there's obviously so much more that goes into it that will, really complicate things, because it is more about the person and how are they going to handle just the day-to-day life of the NFL and it being a business. And you're not going to be coddled like you were in college. You're going to be in a locker room full of 28-year-old vets, and who they know you're in that locker room trying to compete for their job. So it's a mental grind. Not everyone's built that way. And so trying to figure that part out is definitely something that, and I'll be the first to admit, like, it's hard for those of us on the outside looking in to really get that. A lot of it, I'm going based off of secondhand information that I get from scouts that say, hey, this guy, he's his interviews were rough. He's just not a polished person, polished player. Like, you hear that a lot. And so it's like, okay, that's great that I have that info, but what do I do with it now? How do I and I'm very careful about the character stuff because I don't want to bash a kid. I don't want to like damage a kid's reputation or anything like that. Now, if it, like with the case last year with Tavondre Sweat, if it's criminal, a police report, like with the DUI, like, that's different. But a lot of these guys, it's personality concerns. It's maybe he doesn't work hard. Trying to communicate that with the fans without totally killing the kid is something that I know I struggle with every single year.
We're talking to Dane Brugler of The Athletic, author of The Beast. And Dan, I've actually got more questions for you in general, but I can't wait any longer to ask you some Seahawks specific stuff. So,
Yeah.
with all that you've looked at and all that you've learned, give me three names that you think realistically could be available for the Seahawks at 18 that you think make some sense for the Seahawks.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have to start with Zabel. I mean, that seems to be at some point after the combine, Gray Zabel kind of became the well, this makes too much sense. It's going to happen, right? And Gray Zabel being, yes, he's from the FCS level, but in terms of the person and the talent, like, I think teams feel very comfortable with him. The fact that he went to the Senior Bowl, played more snaps than anybody during the week of practice, and killed it, both as a center and as a guard. I think that really helped teams just kind of say, you know what, I don't care that he played the FCS. He dominated at that level. He had no problems against better competition at the Senior Bowl. Goes to the combine, does really well, did really well at his pro day. So I think that a lot of teams are very comfortable with Gray Zabel in the top 25. The Seahawks, I think, being one of them. Obviously, we know they could use some help on the interior of that offensive line. Zabel, yes, he was more of a tackle at North Dakota State, but he did start multiple games at both left guard and right guard. I think the movement skills that he brings, how balanced he is in pass pro. If you want him on the move in the run game, he can do that, but he also has some pop in his hand, so he can stun, he can snatch. There's just a lot to like about him as an all-around player and how he would fit in that Seahawks scheme. If they do go maybe on defense, I mean, I think Jihad Campbell is so interesting for them, and obviously we have the medicals. I mentioned the character and how that really complicates things. The medicals, I mean, that's something that is, we can mention the injuries and, but how is it going to affect these guys long term? That's the question mark. And Campbell's one of them. He has a shoulder, had a previous shoulder, had a knee. The medicals might look a little bit different from team to team when we talk Jihad Campbell, but as just a football player, guys that size, moving that with that type of speed, the way they can cover ground, it's really fun to watch, and the way that he can help transform your front seven. You want to use him as an off-ball linebacker, he can do that because of his range. You want him as a guy that's going to be blitzing a lot. I mean, his closing speed is terrific. He has a really good feel for that in terms of those delayed blitzes and the different pressure packages you want to include with him. So just a really dynamic player with Jihad Campbell. And if the medicals are okay, if you're comfortable with that, I think he'd be in the mix. And then I've always really liked the idea of adding just another fun piece to this offense, another skill player. And I don't know that would happen, but Colston Loveland, I think that would be a lot of fun. Colston Loveland, there's been a lot of debate about Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, about who's the top tight end this year. And I don't really think it's a debate, because it just depends on what type of tight end you want. Tyler Warren is a guy has been doing this a little bit longer in terms of being a true tight end. Neither of these guys are strong blockers, but I think Tyler Warren does give you a little bit more in that area, where Colston Loveland can give you a little more of a vertical stretch. His speed, his ability at the catch point is really impressive, has been more banged up. And so durability is a question mark there, more so than with Tyler Warren. So if you want more of the upside, better athlete guy, that's Colston Loveland. If you want, I think, more of the high floor tight end, that's Tyler Warren. And so it'll be interesting. I think Tyler Warren's going somewhere in that top 12 picks. And then Loveland, he could be long gone by the time we get to 18. But if he's still on the board, is that the immediate need for the Seahawks? No. But I just think it'd be fun to add another pass catcher, another weapon to that offense.
Well, AJ Barner sure would be happy to see his old teammate reunite back up there in Seattle. You might have just answered the question, but is there a guy that you think, obviously Byron Murphy was for a lot of people the best defender in the class last year, at least in the conversation for that, and he ended up falling down to the Seahawks at 16. He was their top defensive player on the board, and they were thrilled that he was available. Is there a player that you think realistically could slip to Seattle at 18, where if that person falls there, you're like turning the card?
Okay. Well, this defensive class is so outside of, if you think Travis Hunter's a corner and Abdul Carter's obviously going to go high, outside of those two guys, and I'd probably throw Mason Graham in there, even though he's not on quite that same level, but I don't think Mason Graham's, going to make it that far. But, outside of those three guys, there's a lot of question marks about this defensive class. Mm-hmm. And so, like a Jalen Walker from Georgia, Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M, Jihad Campbell. I mean, if one of those guys were to fall to 18, does he make you say, maybe that's not our immediate need, but can we really pass on him here? And I think that's kind of the issue with this class, though, is, in my opinion, there are the top tier is really two guys, maybe three if you want to throw Ashton Genty in there, but Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and then if you want to throw Ashton Genty in there, that's fine. That's the top tier in this class. And then that second tier is about 10 to 12 guys. And so do they feel strongly enough about any of those second tier players that they would, need be damned, we're taking one of those guys? I just don't know if that tier, because it's not a first tier. It's not like, what was that, 2021 when we had Micah Parsons went 12, or it was crazy the amount of talent. And part of it was because we had so many quarterbacks go in that draft.
Yep.
3, 1, 2, 3, and then Fields. And so, I think that's not this year. We don't have those quarterbacks, and it's not as strong at the top at the non-quarterback positions. So personally, I think I'd be surprised if they loved any of those second tier guys enough where it's like, we just have to take them. But if one of those offensive linemen were to fall, like an Armand Membu, but theoretically, I think you could move him inside the guard and he'd be just fine. Give you right tackle insurance if you wanted to look at him that way. So, but I think that's maybe the fatal flaw of this draft class is it's just that gap in between. It's not a great year to have a pick between, say 5 and 11. It's just it relative to like other years where you feel like you're getting a true impact player at those spots.
You mentioned Shamar Stewart. He fits in this category of the great question marks in this class. Like, there's people that have him top 10. There's people that have him bottom third of the first round. I talked to Greg Cosell at the Combine, and I talked to him about Nick Emenwari and Shamar Stewart, and he very clearly, like, those are two great athletes, two very different players on tape. And Nick Emenwari is a great football player. Shamar Stewart doesn't yet figure out what he's doing out there quite yet. With a guy like Stewart, you and I both saw him at the Senior Bowl. You could see this guy move, and he just he was different than anyone else out there. Yeah. Where are you at right now on him?
And I just got done mentioning how that tier from 5 to 12 or whatever is not as strong as relative to other drafts, and so I lean to I'm going to bet on the high upside pass rushers. Jalen Walker, Shamar Stewart. I'm going to bet on those guys, and maybe and I think it's different because again I'm doing this from a general point of view. But if I'm in a certain situation with a team, maybe I'm not going to take that bet where I'm going to, roll the dice on a question mark like that. But if I'm, a team like the Ravens, obviously, who, I'm the GM set in place. I'm not going anywhere. I can take that risk. And obviously the Ravens are picking at the bottom of the first round. So it's maybe not the best example, but I think it just depends on your personnel situation and then your job security. Can you take a risk like that? Because, sometimes it's okay to say, we're not 100% sure about a player. We really like him. We see it's okay to say there's two routes for this player. We could see him really blowing up and becoming a impact starter, or we could see this going the other way. And, he's a backup by the time we get to his third year. And so do you just totally write that guy off and say, well, we're not going to draft him? Or do you say, you know what, let's, at this point in the draft, we feel comfortable rolling the dice on a player like that and see if it works out. We trust our coaching as long as our coaches sign off. So yeah, I think you can look at Jalen Walker in that way because he is a little bit of a hybrid. I like him better as a pass rusher. Others like him better as an off-ball guy. The answer might be somewhere in the middle. Shamar Stewart certainly in that way because, like you said, watching him, that burst off the ball seeing that up close and personal at the Senior Bowl from the sidelines, you just don't see that from 270-pound guys. It's just and so you feel like he's just scratching the surface. Now, he might never get to the top of that surface, but you understand why teams would bet on those traits to see if it comes to fruition.
All right, I'm going to give you 3 names of players that are often discussed with the Seahawks and debated among Seahawks fans. Kelvin Banks, Gray Zabel, and Donovan Jackson. Let's assume they're all available for the Seahawks. You're running an outside zone. It's not only outside zone, but that's predominantly it. And they're looking for guys that move off the ball. You want to be a run effective team. Which of those 3 guys, how do you separate those 3 guys?
For me, I would have Zabel. Technically I have got according to my rankings, I have Banks first and then Zabel and then Donovan Jackson. And Donovan Jackson, I like quite a bit. I'm just not quite as high. I don't necessarily see a first rounder. I see a really good second rounder. Banks, I'm not as high on Banks as other people. I don't see him as necessarily a top 15 guy, top 20 guy. But I understand. I mean, he was a left tackle at Texas. They played more of a wide zone offense in Sark's offense. The character's great. There, some of the balance issues really bother me. Like, you watch the Michigan game, and it's like, all right, why are you on the ground? Like, and it just happened quite a bit. You watch the Georgia tape, and it's like, okay, it's you really struggling with length. You're struggling to match power, but he does a lot of things well. He's got the frame. He moves well. He's very patient. He's very skilled in pass protection. Like, he looks very natural at it. It's just when he gets in some of those compromised situations, he struggles to get out of them. And so I wouldn't be shocked if he's in that conversation at 18, just because there's a good chance he could be the best offensive lineman available at that point. And so even though, like, on my board, he's, 26 or whatever, I would understand why you would potentially draft him at 18. Zabel, we kind of talked about. I think he would be a natural fit for what Seattle wants to do with a lot of that movement, his ability on the fly. He's a finisher. I think that'll really speak to offensive line coaches, and especially at Seattle, guys that have movement skills but are not afraid to really hit you and finish you to the ground. Donovan Jackson would be the tricky one. You really commend him for what he did moving out the left tackle over the final 8 games or so and playing at a high level. They gave him a lot of help. He had running backs and tight ends chipping, and they gave him plenty of help, but he held his own. He did not drown when they threw him in the deep end like that. So giving him credit while maybe also pointing out, like, is he truly a tackle? Is he more of a guard? I think that's something that teams debate. What position is he really? But I think he's a really solid player, a guy that's going to come in, compete for starting reps. I would be surprised to see him go as early as 18.
We've had a lot of debate in Seattle after shipping out DK Metcalf and getting back a pick, and a lot of folks have started prognosticating wide receiver to the Seahawks in the first round. And there's a lot of folks that are like, what do you mean? Like, you can't, the whole point is to go from receiver and invest in the trenches. There's other folks that say, hey, this is a really valuable position, and there's some guys worthwhile. I'm going to tell you, this is a poor interviewer's tactic. I'm going to tell you my perspective, and I want to hear from you what yours is.
Okay.
So I'm having a hard time seeing one of the receivers in this class that has enough of a gap that they are worth taking in the first round versus taking at 50 or 52. Difference between a Tet McMillan, a Matthew Golden, whoever you see as a first round potential, versus a guy like Jalen Knoll, Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, who may be available in the second. Where do you fall on the receivers in this class?
I like them, but like, they would all be behind Brian Thomas in last year's draft, in my opinion. Like, last year's, for me, is Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, 1A, 1B. Those guys they would be they would probably both would be number 1 in this draft for me, based off of just their grade from last year. Overall, not even just at the receiver.
Yeah.
And then Rome Odunze was wide receiver 3, and then Brian Thomas was right behind Odunze, wide receiver 4, is like my 15th prospect or something like that. This year, all these receivers would be behind those 4. And I really do like T-Mac from Arizona, and Golden has really, it was sporadic in terms of production, but it wasn't sporadic. It was more ascending. Like, we have to remember, he was a transfer, and so getting in earlier in the year, they really wanted Isaiah Bond to be the guy. And over the course of the year, it became pretty clear, okay, no, Golden is clearly the best receiver on this roster. And he just crushed the process, run a 4.2 at the combine. And then, which scouts dinged him a little bit because he kind of shut it down. He ran the 4.2 and then just like, all right, I'm done, nothing else. But then at the pro day, ran routes, and talking to multiple scouts that were there, they raved about Matthew Golden, how he did at his workout. So I like these guys quite a bit, but they would still be behind the top 4 guys last year. And so I 100% agree. Now, maybe that could be one of the answers to what you mentioned earlier about if someone's there, if the right player's there at 18, they just couldn't pass. If they like one of these receivers enough, could that possibly be the pick if they like McMillan enough, or Golden, or even Ibuka? I don't think you can rule it out. I would lean your way, where it would be a little bit of a surprise. It's not a strong second round market for receivers, like there's a
Mm-hmm.
good chance the three that you mentioned are off the board by the time the Seahawks pick.
Yep.
Just because there's so many teams that need receivers, and this is just not a top heavy. It's not a bad year for receiver, but it's more average than great, and it's not very top heavy, especially when you get to that second round where I really like the Iowa State guys. Kyle Williams from Washington State has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fans around the league. There's plenty of names, but it's not maybe as rich as other years in terms of the wide receiver talent around too.
All right. Can I give you a couple quick hitters before I let you go?
Yeah.
All right. Give me the Seahawks need a nose tackle. Give me your top three nose tackles that are like pure A gap kind of guys in this class.
See, and I see Alfred Collins as that type of guy from Texas who, just a massive, massive dude. He can be disruptive. He can be, but I also think that he can really plug gaps and be a guy that's going to uh, be dominant versus the run. I think he can be a really dominant run defender more than anything else. Jay Toia from UCLA has a lot of fans around the league. He's going to go somewhere in that third, fourth round range. Another guy that has size. He's maybe not the most explosive in terms of moving, but he plays wide. He has power. He can hold up versus doubles, but he also has a little bit of range. Not a lot of range, but a little bit of range where he can track the ball from the backfield, move up and down the line, and make some plays. And so he's more than just a tree stump in the middle of that line. Maybe CJ West is a guy we've talked about before. I think he fits as well.
Mm-hmm.
His journey is fun coming from, being a basketball guy and then goes to Kent State and then goes to Indiana, and a guy that really pops when you watch that defensive line. You don't necessarily need to know his number. He stands out because he will get upfield quickly. But he also has the ability to muddy the waters again in the run game. Whether that's if you want to line them up strictly as a one technique, a shade, and let them really create car crashes in the middle of that line, he can do that. You can play him as more of a three, or even as a 4-eye, and get him. When you're anticipating. If you're playing a wide zone team and you're anticipating outside run, you can get him out there and he's got a little bit of movement to him, so he can really help you out as a run defender out there. So I think CJ West brings a little bit of that versatility, that interchangeable defensive tackle that can help you out as a nose and then also be schemed around a little bit.
All right. Last question for you, Dane. I'll let you go. You talk to teams. You obviously, scouts, analysts, all this stuff. What's a guy that maybe you think that teams are higher on than the general media, or vice versa? If there's someone stands out either way that you think, you look around these mock drafts, you look around and someone's either way higher than you think the teams see him, or way lower than you think teams see him.
Well, I'll give you a guy that has been connected to the Seahawks a little bit. Bryce Cabledew, who wasn't a combine guy, but teams like this guy, they think, on day 3, this is the guy they want to take a chance on. He is, a 4-year starter at Kansas, played both left and right tackle. The movement skills are really impressive. That's the thing. He's explosive. And so I think that stands out. His hands are really good. His timing really stands out. He plays with torque. And so that natural power that he gets from his base shows. He's one of those guys I think you see a lot of teams. I hear a lot of teams say, "Oh, look, 5th round. This could be our guy." Like that's something that comes up a lot. So I think he's on the radar of a lot of teams as being one of the better non-combine guys this year. Where I think last year the first non-combine guy was Mapu. The Patriots took maybe in the 3rd round. This year I don't know if we're gonna get a top 100 non-combine guy. But this guy could be in the conversation once we get to day 3 as being one of the better non-combine players this year.
Dane, amazing stuff as always. And I just want to say 2 things. One, I'm so happy for you, man. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a sigh of relief and accomplishment when it goes out tomorrow. And the other is there's a lot of folks that just talk and talk. And I'm certainly, I talk a lot, but I really appreciate you're one of the people that really puts the work in, man. And so, ton of respect for what you
Appreciate
do. Really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully you enjoy the next few weeks as you get to reap what you've sown.
No, I appreciate that. Hey, you make me smarter about the Seahawks, so it's I get a lot out of every time we talk, and so it's helpful for me. And no, I appreciate the kind words. It means a lot, and I can't wait until tomorrow to share this thing.
Awesome. Well, we'll be talking about it on here for sure. That is Dane Brugler of The Athletic. Make sure you check him out and check out The Beast. It'll be coming out tomorrow on The Athletic. Thanks a lot, Dane.
Thanks, man.
All right. That is Dane Brugler. Lot to chew on there, folks. Got some names to think about. You know, we talked about 18. Gray Zabel is the guy that would be the least surprising pick at this point, I think. Just about everybody, whether it's Daniel Jeremiah, myself, Dane Brugler, whoever you kind of talk to, that's the name. Now, if he's gone, that's where things get particularly interesting. And I think a name that we don't talk about enough, unless you're Nathan Ernst, is Kelvin Banks, the left tackle for the Longhorns. And you heard Dane's got him ahead of Gray Zabel. This is a guy that I think there's a lot of potential for him to fall to Seattle at 18. And this is a guy that 2 or 3 months ago was in most mocks a top 10 pick. He might still be a top 10 pick. He might, he's more likely to be a top 15 pick, but he could end up in Seattle. So that's a name, and you heard Dane talk about that. And then, I think the Donovan Jackson stuff is pretty consistent, generally speaking. Look, good player, more comfortable with him being a second-round pick than a first-round pick. But, that could be the situation. If Banks and Zabel are gone, that's when you could end up. By those guys being gone, that means other players are falling down. That's when you could see the Seahawks actually have to really stare it in the face. Like, is Donovan Jackson or is one of these other offensive linemen really worth picking at 18, even though we know how important it is to address that position? Or do we take best player available? And you heard Dane talk about Shemar Stewart the way I talk about Shemar Stewart. Like, in a draft like this where there aren't a lot of sure bets, betting on traits is something that makes some sense. And passing on a guy that has, in any draft class, top 10 traits is questionable. So I think a guy like that could end up being part of the conversation for Seattle. I'll tell you what, there's been a lot of feedback on some of the mock drafts I've done of, hey, you're missing an edge rusher. I'm not as high on this edge class as other people are. And, I like Mike Green. I don't know that he's a great fit for what the Seahawks are going to do. I was intrigued by James Pierce. I've been kind of scared off of him by some of the off-field character things that I've seen and heard relative to teammates, coaches, things of that nature. Jalen Walker, hybrid. I'm not sure we really know what he is. And for me, I don't see it so clearly that he's going to be an excel at an edge position. Jahad Campbell, who I keep hearing, hey, he's great as an inside backer. He's also great as an edge rusher. I'm like, well, that's not really a great combination of hybrid skills, because if you're in a pass rushing situation, you don't take your best inside backer who's great in coverage and put him as an edge rusher. It's not typically the way things work. So I think you're either one or you're the other. Of course, you can use somebody in all sorts of ways. And if you bring a safety down, you can kind of switch things around. Maybe it makes you more of a amoeba defense. Sure. But I see Jahad Campbell as just a great inside backer. And I'm just not convinced that spending a mid-first round pick on an inside linebacker in any draft is a good idea, let alone when you've already got that position relatively well accounted for. And if you were to add Fred Warner to the Seahawks, maybe he's the best inside backer out there right now, I don't know that changes their win total. You could say I'm crazy, but I'm not sure the difference between the Seahawks starting Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight versus the difference between the Seahawks starting Ernest Jones and Fred Warner would be the difference between them winning 1-2 more games. And I think there is the potential that if you hit on an edge rusher, that could be the case. If you hit on the offensive lineman, could be the case. Certainly in the future, if you hit on a quarterback, that could be the case. Cornerback, another one entirely different. To give you some idea, there's actually a really good article that Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap wrote. And I'm going to actually share on my screen the image from this article that Jason Fitzgerald wrote, because there's an aspect of picking players in the draft, specifically in the first round, that is underreported, underappreciated, underanalyzed. And that is like, from a pure economics perspective, you want to take players who are going to command the highest salary in the draft, right? The earliest, the better. So why is that the case? Obviously, you always want to do that, but why does that matter? Well, because you are getting them, part of the benefit of the draft is you are getting them at a set rookie salary, right? We all know this. This isn't new information. But if you look at the difference between a rookie salary and what's the salary of a top player at that position, that delta is not the same for every position. The difference between a rookie center's salary and a top 20 or top 15 center's salary is just not as great as the difference between a rookie quarterback salary and a top 15 quarterback salary. So from an economics perspective, you're trying to exploit that aspect to gain the most financial advantage, not just talent advantage, but financial advantage to your draft class. So this is a chart, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better, from Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap. And what you can see here is along one axis, you've got the average first round salary cap benefit. So to the right, the more to the right, the more salary benefit you're getting from taking that player. And then along the vertical axis here, you've got the top 20 players' free agent availability. So how many of these players that have the top 20 salaries at their position were signed as free agents versus they're on their rookie deals. So the higher up you go on this vertical axis, the more likely it is that you can actually pay for in free agency talent at that position. So long snapper is the easiest to pay for in free agency. If you want to get a great long snapper, you could do it free agency. Punter, another one. Center, another one. So there's a little bit of a catch to this particular graph that I wrote Jason about today. We'll see if he answers and maybe adjusts. But there are only 32 starting centers in the NFL. So, of course, when you have top 20 player availability, that's a little different than if you look at, let's say, edge rushers, where there's at least 2 starters on every team, or interior defensive linemen, where there's generally at least 2 starters on every team. So top 20 of 64 is different than top 20 of 32, if that makes sense. Wide receiver, the same. You could almost say for wide receiver, there's 96 starters because a lot of teams play 11 personnel and have 3 receivers on the field a lot. But if you look at this graph as it is, which I think is useful regardless, this bottom right quadrant, this is where you find the positions that you should most target in the first round if you're a player, or if you're a team. These should be your priority positions. Those positions are quarterback, wide receiver, interior defensive line, edge rusher, right tackle and left tackle, offensive tackle. Okay. Now, starting to creep over is guard in the top right quadrant. It's the only one that's in the top right. And I think that this data, by the way, is a year old. Be very interesting to see when Jason refreshes this for this year, what that data looks like now. But guard is starting to be one of those positions that you may need to take earlier if you want to get the salary cap benefit. I think it's also interesting that cornerback is in the top right quadrant. So you can buy good corners typically relative to these other positions. At least in this, over 50% of the top 20 cornerback salaries were free agent signings. That's interesting. In fact, it's easier to pay for a good corner than it is to pay for a good safety. Safeties were closer to 40% of the top 20 salaries. So, again, it used to be pretty clear that guard, especially, or interior offensive line, guard and center were almost joined at the hip, as you really shouldn't spend on those positions early on. But that's changed a bit. And Jason's got some other data in here. I'm going to show you guys this as well, where he says of the top 20 contracts, in what round were those players picked? For quarterbacks, 65% of them were taken in the first round. And then it dips down to 15% in the second round, almost none in the third round, and a few in the fourth round. But if you're taking a quarterback after the fourth round, not likely. Now, this will change once Brock Purdy signs his contract, but again, dominated by first round quarterbacks. Wide receivers, more spread out. Wide receivers, you're going to get close to 30% of the top 20 receiver contracts taken in the first round. Actually, more taken in the second round than taken in the first round. And then roughly the same in the third round as were taken in the first round. So you've got, with receiver, for me, again, you don't have to take those guys in the first round to get that talent. And you look at the Seahawks, Golden Tate, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse. There's been a lot of good receivers that have come through Seattle that have not been first round picks. Edge contracts. This one is more first round heavy. So again, this is when you hear me, like, if you're tired of me talking about Shemar Stewart, you're like, stop talking about Shemar Stewart, take an offensive lineman. I get it. He's one of the only guys that I think could realistically fall to the Seahawks that I could understand if the Seahawks chose to make that pick, because finding truly dominant edge rushers is a massive salary cap advantage if you can get him on a rookie deal. And he has that potential. He is not close to fulfilling it, but he has that potential. And almost 60% of the top 20 edge rushers by salary were picked in the first round. It drops down to 10% for the second round, third round, and fourth round. So you can find them elsewhere. It's much harder to do. Center. This is a fun one. This is like, you look at this, it tells you the whole story. Of the top 20 centers, and again, 20 centers is out of 32 starting centers. That's why I think it's a little bit misleading, right? Versus top 20 edge rushers out of 64 starting edge rushers, right? It's a little different. In any event, you can get these centers throughout the draft. You've actually the most common round to get a top 20 center is the 6th round. And right next to it is UDFA. You're probably not going to find many other positions where that's the case. At least like positions that play on the field on offense or defense relative to special teams. And if you look at this table that Jason's come up with, you can look at the guard position right here. And what you get for the guard position is that 47% of the top 20 guard contracts were drafted in rounds 2 or 3. I guarantee if John Schneider's listening, he's like, yeah, there is some logic to what I've been telling you guys. Only 32% have been drafted in round 1. So it is more common to get a top 20 guard in rounds 2 or 3 than it is in round 1. Doesn't mean that's going to be the case this year. This is just the way the data is played over the last 4 years, 5 years, I think, 20 through 24. So all this stuff plays a role. Greg Cosell, interestingly and kind of ironically, the thing that started this conversation was Greg Cosell had a clip talking about defensive tackles, and Kevin Cole, who does great work, talked about how offensive tackles are taking it earlier and earlier. I think he misunderstood what Greg Cosell was saying. But in any event, Greg Cosell was saying he heard there might be as many as 20 defensive tackles taken in the first, I don't remember what he said. It was like the first 2 days, maybe. It was a large percentage of the picks. And interior defensive linemen, 56% of the top 20 contracts for interior defensive linemen went to round 1 players. Only 31% were drafted in rounds 2 or 3. This is the Howie Roseman data right here. Edge, interior defensive lineman, left tackle, like, take those guys in the first round. And the Seahawks, historically, I'm going to do a whole show on this, might even do it tomorrow, on John Schneider's draft tendencies and where he takes certain positions over his long career in Seattle. Interior defensive line is a position that if there's someone you love, you got to take him early. And I'll tell you, I'm not saying this guy should go in the first round. But the information I have is that the Seahawks and Omar Norman Lott have had a number of conversations. And that's a guy I love. But I don't think he's a first-round player. I think he could be a second-round player. And if nothing else, it indicates the Seahawks are absolutely continuing to look for interior disruptive defensive linemen. Don't know what that means for the first round. We'll find out. I think I've got a couple super chats. Let me catch up on those. Before I do that, if you haven't given the show a like, click subscribe. Please do. We greatly appreciate it. We got great guests on like Dane Brugler. I mean, this guy's amazing. Make sure you check out The Beast tomorrow. He does amazing work. Also, if you are like, hey, I'm tired of the audio ads on this show, if you're listening to this show as a podcast, all you got to do to listen to ad-free audio, sign up over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. Gets you all the ad-free audio to this show. Also gets you access to the Discord channel where you can talk about the Seahawks, talk about a bunch of other sports all day, every day. Great time over there. A lot of great folks, hundreds of folks over there. It's a good crew. Also, if you're a YouTube member, if you upgrade to club level, club level or higher, you get access to the Discord channel. And if you upgrade to suite level or Ring of Honor over on Patreon, either one of those gets you access to the Elite channel in Discord, only available to those folks. So would love to have folks join over there. And fun announcement as well. Tomorrow night, Real Hawk Talk will be back. And we got another fun guest. Stacey Rost of Bump and Stacey's show over on Seattle Sports will join us again. She's been with us before. We always have a great time. It'll be Stacey, Evan Hill, and Dana O'Gorman, along with myself, as we take your Patreon questions and we just talk about whatever we end up talking about. With Evan and Stacy on the same show, you never know where we're going to go. So that'll be a lot of fun tomorrow night. That'll be a little bit later than normal, 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. Keep an eye out for that show tomorrow for Real Hawk Talk. So a lot of great stuff continuing to come. I'm going to keep trying to pull in some great guests along the way, and we'll charge our way into this draft. With that, let me get to Super Chats. A question from Hawks fan Mattman, one of the earliest and most loyal. I don't know if loyal is the right word. I don't like the sound of that. One of the most active members of the community. Hawks fan Mattman says, "Hey Brian, are you planning on doing another draft live stream watch along this year? I loved having a Seahawks centric draft stream last year." 100%. We are really looking forward to it. I think that Jeff's going to be able to participate this year. We'll see. The one little question mark is I'm working with Seahawks PR because this will be the first year I will have access to be on the VMAX site to interview or join the conference calls with the drafted players, 15 minutes after they're drafted. And then be able to ask questions of John and Mike at the end of each day of the draft. So, not sure I'm going to be allowed to live stream on site there during the draft. I hope I can. Working on that with them. If I'm not, then I will probably live stream here and forego the chance to interview the players on the conference call, but I will then scoot my little butt over to the VMAC to ask questions of John and Mike at the end of the draft. So one way or another, we will do a live stream. It's going to be great. If you like the free agent frenzy, which a lot of people did, we had like 35,000 people watching that show. We'll definitely do the draft live stream. It's one of my favorite parts of the year. All right, next, Vince Ochoa, who's been a member for 7 months, says, "Awesome guests, Brian. Keep up the great work." Man, well, thank you. Appreciate the encouragement. I will tell you guys, I'm going to give you, this is a little bit like mean tweets. If you guys ever listen to that on, I think Brock and Salk or whoever puts that out there. This is kind of what I hear when I put things out in the world. And I'll give you a couple examples. I tweeted out a note that said just about the show with Rob and Griff from Sunday, which was a great show. I highly recommend you check it out. And I just was saying, hey, check it out. We have this fun show coming up. And a guy says, are any of your mocks even 5 or 10% accurate? That's why I just don't pay attention to any of this stuff. You guys can freak out about this, spend hundreds of hours on it, and I'm just going to wait for the draft and spend 30 minutes checking them out afterwards. There's a number of folks that kind of have this perspective, which is fine. You can feel however you want. But my question is, so why are you commenting on draft content if you don't care about it and you think it's a waste of time? And so I asked him, I was like, why are you commenting on that if you don't care about it? And he's like, it's just really amazing that people spend countless hours of human activity and massive amounts of energy and resources doing something that produces no useful work for humanity. What you should do is do a draft that includes all the other mock drafts combined together. I'm like, wow. So you're telling me that you don't pay attention to draft content. You're telling me it's an amazing waste of time. The thing that I'm doing as my job, at least for now, and that I like doing, and you don't think that that's insulting. Okay. And then you say, oh, by the way, I've got this great idea, this novel idea, which is called consensus mock drafts and has been around for a long time. that's one example. I could give you more. I see this whole conversation with Geno Smith still going on. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this. But I'm guessing you saw my tweet. I I just don't agree with the vitriol that's out there about the Geno Smith situation on either side. And so in those moments, I just try to take an opportunity to spread some positive energy. And so I sent a note out, just congratulating Geno on the contract, wishing him well, and making it clear I just don't think there's a villain in this story. And by the way, that doesn't mean that I think John Schneider's a villain either. I just don't think there's a villain in this story. And some of the comments back, okay, Mr. Virtue Signaler. Okay, that's a nice one. Man, you're a suck up. Spoken like a true keyboard kisser. There are folks, so this is folks that are telling me that I'm kissing Geno's butt on the same day that I've got another guy that I've had to block, to be honest, because he's telling me that I am a shill for the Seahawks PR staff and that I'm defending John and that Geno's been wronged. I think that generally means you're probably in the right space when all sides to the extreme of an argument hate you. But man, like maybe it's the quiet part of the off season where the crazies sound louder. But be careful out there, folks. Be careful out there. Hopefully that's part of why I'm so committed to making sure that the chat on this show is a kind, safe space. Treat people well, treat my guests well, treat me well, treat each other well. And why Discord is the same way. Those are the only rules, is essentially keep to football, keep it friendly, be respectful. So that's my little side rant on that for the time being. Okay, I am going to let you go on that note. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I will do more mock drafts probably tomorrow, but we'll also be talking about Dane Brugler. Actually, let me do one thing. Let me do one thing before I go, because I have not I've not looked at the latest mock draft from my goodness, from Mel Kiper. Yeah, he has a new mock draft that just came out. So let me put this up here. I meant to react to this, and I got lost in my bitch session. So let me put this up. Here is Mel Kiper's latest mock. If you've already seen this, fine. If not, you get access to some exclusive ESPN content. So stick around. So he's got Cam Ward 1, Travis Hunter 2, Abdul Carter 3. Interestingly, one of the things that's going on right now is people are really seeing the Giants as a pivot point for Shedeur Sanders. If they don't take him, Shedeur could slip. So one to watch. Will Campbell 4 to the Patriots. Mason Graham 5 to the Jags. Ashton Genty 6 to the Raiders. Armand Membu 7 to the Jets. All this is chalk so far. Jalen Walker to the Panthers. Shedeur Sanders to the Saints. This is an increasing connection. Tyler Warren to the Bears. That's kind of interesting. All right, I could see that. Will Johnson to the 49ers, the cornerback. I think this is a guy that increasingly is one to watch for the Seahawks as well, to be honest. I would not put it past them that they look at a guy like Will Johnson if he falls to them. I would be happy if he went to the 49ers. Like, keep stocking your secondary. Ignore your defensive line. Please continue, and your offensive line. Please do that. Omarion Hampton goes to the Cowboys at 12. Jahdae Barron, the corner, goes to the Dolphins at 13. Colston Loveland, because Tyler Warren's gone, goes to the Colts at 14. Mike Green to the Falcons. I think that is that one to me screams like a Falcons pick. I would bet on that one personally. But Matthew Golden to the Cardinals, I actually also think that makes sense. Adding some speed to that receiver room would be great because it would mean they'd pass on offensive linemen. Jahad Campbell goes to the Bengals at 17. He has got, what did I tell you? Kelvin Banks Jr. going to the Seahawks at 18. He says Banks gave up 3 sacks over 42 career starts at left tackle for the Longhorns. He's an agile 6'5", 315 pounds, has some pop. Seahawks have Charles Cross at left tackle, so Banks would help elsewhere on the lackluster offensive line. Right tackle Abe Lucas played 13 games past few seasons. The guard spots are both issues. Banks could fit at any of those spots. Okay, makes sense. He's got Nick Emmanwori going right after him. Tet McMillan, Derek Harmon, Gray Zabel going at 22 to the Chargers. That's kind of interesting. I don't know that I see the Chargers drafting another offensive lineman. I think they've got their offensive line. I don't think first-round offensive line talent makes sense. Michael Williams, Donovan Jackson, he has in the first round to the Vikings at 24. Josh Connerly Jr., Jackson Dart to the Rams, which I also think makes a lot of sense. Malachi Starks at 27 to the Ravens. Donovan Ezeraku, the edge rusher, to the Lions. Shamar Stewart to the Commanders at 29. So he talked about that he thinks Shamar Stewart could go as high as 17. Something to watch. Max Hairston, cornerback to the Bills. Josh Simmons, offensive tackle to the Chiefs at 31. And then James Pierce Jr. to the Eagles at 32. He's got Tyler Shuck at the first pick of the second round, the quarterback to the Browns. Jalen Milroe, the second pick of the second round to the Giants. That's interesting. Olufemi Oladejo at 35. Igbuka, Schlesinger, Burden, Nolan, Azariah Thomas, the corner. Trayvon Henderson, the running back. Arroyo, the tight end at 42. Kenneth Grant to the 49ers at 43. He's really dropped, and I honestly agree. I don't think he's tested enough to be a first rounder. That'd be a great second round get, though. I'd be fine if for somehow he got to 50. I'd be definitely fine with that. Trey Amos, the corner to the Cowboys. Jonas Savaiinaya to the Colts at 45. Ben Morrison at 46. Tyler Booker at 47 to the Cardinals. I think that makes a ton of sense. He's like a Will Hernandez style guard. I think he could fit right in there. Darius Alexander to the Dolphins, the defensive tackle. Edge rusher to the Bengals. And then he's got Shavon Revel Jr., the corner, going to the Seahawks. Mentions that Seattle hosted Revel on a visit this week, and the fit makes sense. Seahawks have Reek Woolen on outside corner spot, and Devin Witherspoon can play outside and inside. Once Revel is back and on the field at 100%, he could be the other outside corner. He has speed and length, and he makes plays on the ball. In 3 games last season, he picked off 2 passes and took one of them to the house. Then at the second pick, he has, at 52, he's got them taking Jaden Higgins. All right, Mel, you win, man. I will take Kelvin Banks. and Shavon Revel Jr. and Jaden Higgins. I will take all 3 of those guys. Here's what he says about Jaden Higgins. Let's continue a wild 2 months of wide receiver turnover with the Seahawks. Higgins could bring a little of the physicality that Metcalf brought. He's 6'4", 214 pounds, showed the explosion at the combine with 39-inch vertical. Higgins caught 87 passes. Got it. By the way, I've been trying to get Jaden on the show. We're not going to give up. We've been talking to his representation. He's been going on a lot of visits. I got other guys I've been trying to get on the show as well. This is visit season, so they're all flying all across the country, but going to keep trying to get these guys on so you can get to know them a little bit better. All right, well, I love that from Mel Kiper. I would be thrilled with a Kelvin Banks, Shavon Revel Jr., and Jaden Higgins first 3 picks. No notes on that. All right, folks, that is it for this episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.